Africa's first COVID-19 vaccination plant may be forced to close its doors after receiving no orders. In South Africa alone, only 30% of the population has been fully vaccinated. The plant opened in Gqebhera last year with the aim of packaging and selling its Aspenovax jabs across the African continent. So let's get to the latest on the situation. We're joined now by Aspen Senior Director, Dr. Stavros Nicolao, who joins us via video link this morning. Stavros, it's great to talk to you. Yesterday, we spoke to the Health Department's Dr. Nicholas Crisp around what this would mean for your manufacturing plant, but also for the country insofar as our vaccine stocks is concerned. I suppose, first of all, is it a likelihood that the plant may well close?
Michelle, firstly, thanks very much for having me back on the program. Just to be clear, we're not looking to shut down any plant. Mm-hmm. We have in our Gqebhera facility multiple plants. One of those plants manufactures sterile products. And what we did, because of the emergency situation during COVID, we repurposed 2 of our production lines that we would have used to manufacture anesthetics. We repurposed those on an emergency basis so that we could produce COVID vaccines. Mm-hmm. So the issue at hand here is that there have been no orders received for the product we licensed from Johnson & Johnson. The product is called Aspenovax. Aspenovax, as you correctly stated at the onset of this interview, is the African vaccine produced in Quebec, African vaccine for Africans. So we risk losing that, that capacity and that capability on the continent if we are not able to receive orders in order to sustain the lines. Mm. If we are unable to sustain them, of course, we will have to pivot back to manufacturing other things. But the real risk here is, I think we all know that we're not out of the woods as yet with COVID. We don't quite know what trajectory it will take next. We know that we are entering or are possibly even in a 5th wave as we speak. And that applies to South Africa and the continent. So to lose that capacity and have to retrofit back into anesthetics will be a blow for the continent, because it will put us back to square one where we were 18 months ago at the back end of the queue when it comes to COVID vaccines.
But how is it going to work, Stavros? Because the situation that Nicholas Crisp described to us yesterday was, at least here in South Africa, we're in a situation where we've got 22 million doses of Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer vaccines that are sitting in storage. And we still have pending orders of those vaccines coming into the country. So, I mean, how do you see it unfolding over the coming months, given our situation in South Africa, which is quite similar to the rest of the continent in terms of orders still coming in?
That's a great question, and I think the response is a fairly simple one. You know, South Africa represents about 4% of the African population. You know, we're a country of 60 million. Africa's population is 1.3 billion. Now, Africa set itself a target to vaccinate 70% of its adult population, so that roughly would have translated to around 800 million Africans being vaccinated. The reality on the ground is that Africa is only 18%, so less than 20% vaccinated. So there's a gap of, you know, anything between 40 to 50% right now. And that's what needs to happen, is the multilateral procurement agencies that procure these products for and on behalf of Africa need to start placing orders with African producers such as Aspen. So right now, all the vaccines that have been procured through these facilities have not come from Africa. And what we are looking for is either orders or a strong signal that there will be procurement from Africa. Now, you raise another very important point, Michelle, which is why are the levels of vaccination so low on the continent? And it's going to require a reigniting of the political will across the continent, but also we have to deal with the next pandemic, which is complacency. I think we're starting to see a rising tide of cases in South Africa, and usually we either start of it on the tip of the continent, and then you start seeing cases increasing elsewhere on the continent. But even outside of our continent, have a look at what's going on in China, in Europe, and other parts of the world. We are not out of the woods with this pandemic, and vaccinations are the safest way to deal with it.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, everything that you've just said in terms of vaccines and vaccine equity on the continent, this plant remains incredibly important in addressing not only COVID-19 vaccine inequality, but certainly others as well. You'll explain the science behind it for us. I'm sure you can't just go from one vaccine to another in terms of production at the plant at the moment. But it's an important step that we took, opening this factory, this manufacturing plant in Gqebhera, the first in Africa.
Michelle, two responses to what is really an outstanding question from you. I think the first is we all need to cast our minds back 18 months ago, when there was this frenzied scramble for vaccines globally. Right? And you couldn't get vaccines for love or money at the time. And we said as a continent, there's not a single, World Trade Organization, World Bank, African Union, not a single entity that did not say we desperately needed capacity on the continent so that we could not have this reliance on the rest of the world. We saw India clamp up. India put export restrictions on vaccines, and we were left at the back end of the queue. So we have to stare that reality that we faced 18 months ago. We've got to stare that in the face again today and say, can we afford to lose this capacity on the continent? And there are other capacities being planned. But why even plan them or execute them? If if Aspen's not going to get this right, then who will get it right? We'll have to live with the fact that we don't have capacity on the continent to make COVID vaccines, and that for me is untenable and inconceivable. The second thing, Michelle, is just very briefly, of course, Aspen is making all its sterile capability and capacity available to the continent. It doesn't just reside with COVID vaccines. We've got medium to long-term ambitions of providing other sterile and biologic products potentially to the African continent, so we can deal with many, many pandemics that exist on our continent. But we have to sort out the short term, which is the next 18 months or so, where we've got this COVID vaccine gap.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's great to get that clarity. Dr. Stavros Nicolao, let me thank you for your time this morning on the AM Report, Aspen's Senior Director. And it's a story we've been tracking for you over the past couple of days. The reports that Africa's first COVID-19 vaccination plant may well face closure. And given the importance of a step like that, given the importance of having Africa's first vaccination plant in South Africa and widespread vaccine inequality on the continent, good to know that that is not an option for Aspen. That manufacturing plant, they say, will not be closing.